states, and legal engineering. So this talk is legal tech, network states, and legal engineering. We're going to discuss opportunities in legal technology, and we're going to use the horse and buggy to e-car analogy for transportation to understand what's going on in a more like concrete, visceral way. Why mechanized law? Well, in the past 15 or so years, the cost of law has gone up over 150%. It's one of the worst offenders next to healthcare and education. But if we look at transportation, on the other hand, since the 1800s, transportation has now even less than 1% of what it used to cost. So that's hard to believe. It's because transportation still costs quite a bit of money, but just to cross the Oregon Trail, lots of people didn't make it. Titanic, people didn't make it, and now people rarely die in transportation, and just a few $100s to cross the Atlantic in a few hours. So the argument is we can have a similar experience with law. So right now we're in a horse and buggy era of law, and we can go into something with as much abundance as we enjoy with transportation. So so one of the reasons is because law is a cost in all other industries. If we look at agriculture, law costs more than agriculture, so feeding everyone in the U.S. is less expensive than the legal relationship building that we have between people in the U.S. And then roughly 1 in 9 or 1 in 10 of the costs in healthcare, and again in the U.S. that's one of the main offenders, or probably one of the main inflations is healthcare. So healthcare is 180%, law is 150% increase. But then when we realize, if we lower the cost of law, we'll then also lower the cost of healthcare and all these other areas. There are many, many projects I've been part of that don't ever get off the ground because the legal costs are just too much. So in DeFi and startup environments, it's incredibly important. So again, back to the horse and buggy analogy. We've over 99% difference between relying on horse-drawn carriages and now using electric vehicles. So we think there's a similar path with the same basic first principle strategy, which is to mechanize labor that's done by animals or humans. So go from muscular labor, in this case muscle of the brain, into more and more machine labor. So these muscles and these muscles, but they're still, muscles in a way. And one of the reasons law is so expensive is because we have more and more of a networked society and global relationships. And so people create legal relationships between each other just organically, and then lawyers help facilitate that. And so the amount of legal relationships individuals peer-to-peer are developing together globally is outpacing the rate that lawyers can keep up and help facilitate that. So the reason people are doing that is because they are mechanizing different areas of the law. So legal tech, how we see legal tech and how it's different than legal engineering. We'll get into legal engineering. I'm a legal engineer. But legal tech is mechanizing existing law. So it's not saying let's do something different. So let's go back to the horse and buggy analogy. It's not saying we're changing from a horse and buggy. It's saying that we can, in that environment, make it easier. So for instance, a stable hand doesn't need to scoop manure. We can use robots to do the manure scooping. And then hopefully, we can have more and more work be done by actual people. That's the work. And then the labor, thinking of like an Aristotelian difference between labor and work, robots can do the labor. So lawyers, more and more LawTech, when it does really well, it makes lawyers' lives easier and more fun to be lawyers. And to this day, people still do horse and buggy. So getting into our vision of the future of how law is going to be, even though, we do see it being drastically different than how it is right now, just like having a car is drastically different than horse and buggy. There's still lots of similarities. For instance, a car, you still have to navigate it, pay full attention, as you do with a horse and buggy, and still people use horse and buggies. It's not like that's gone away. And equestrians are still people that are high respected. If anything, they have more social prestige. The equestrians who are still around. So yeah, so legal tech, comparing legal tech and legal engineering. Legal tech is right at the Overton window. I would say if the best time for legal tech was a couple years ago to prepare, anticipate what's the bloom that's happening right now especially with AI, because AI can finally handle the vagaries of law that traditional computers couldn't. So the mechanical processes had only a certain amount of availability because they were just too literal, and law is very much a soft social dynamic, a lot of ambiguity as well. So yeah, so this is Overton window it's popular now. So even big law, yeah, let's include AI in our legal research and other traditional ways of doing law. And so it's arguably maybe here, but we're saying it's here. This is a great time. So this presentation was designed for a hackathon that went on last week, and so we're saying this is a great time to focus as a hacker on legal tech, not so much legal engineering. Yes, because legal engineering is more on the visionary side. So it's here. It's been around since the 70s, so it's past the innovator stage, and now the past 5 years or so, we finally have a name for our profession. So when it was just the innovators, we didn't have a name, and it was people that made huge impact, creating things like markup language and smart contracts. Now there's more bread and butter work. So because there's smart contracts around blockchain, they're especially in-house legal engineers, like an enterprise, it's enough of a profession. There's still very few of us, but enough of a profession that we're giving ourselves a name and starting to build up standard associations, though none are actually extant yet. So we're still in the kind of planning stage for that kind of thing. But we do think that legal engineering, because of the network state movement, legal engineering has a good chance of moving really, really fast, being propelled by what's happening in the network states. So network states, we're arguing, is in the chasm right now. So here at Zuitzerland, we're figuring out how to move from the chasm into the early majority pragmatists. So yeah, we've got pop-ups here and there. We could argue maybe it's in the visionary stage, but personally we believe, yeah, it's in this space. There's a lot of differentiation happening, lots of capital going in, different business models that are happening, but it's yet to have good flywheels that are expanding, scaling up very quickly. And legal engineering helps facilitate crossing the chasm because what's happening in network states is it's offering a blue ocean, an environment to do brand new ways of imagining how we can interact with the law. So for instance, Prospero, where we have our firm, it has polycentric law, and then we can do regulation per company and use insurance providers to decide whether that regulation is good or bad, because they're the ones who pay out if there's harm, if the regulation is too lenient. And then the company, it chooses the regulation it wants so that it can move faster, so it isn't held back. So hopefully that balance between the company choosing its own regulation and the insurance provider having to approve it because they're the ones that does pay out if harm happens, we'll find that equilibrium between restraint and acceleration. Yeah, network states will catalyze legal engineering. So for instance, sovereign individuals being accepted more and more by nation states. They're competing for talent. A lot of talent in blockchain as well as AI believes in this concept of sovereign individual. It's not saying that the state isn't also sovereign. In a lot of ways, it's just bringing back concepts like habeas corpus that have been arguably watered down in the past few hundred years. But yeah, there hasn't been a network state that's yet found sustainability. And again, some examples of there are more and more companies that are part of this network state space, or coordination networks, it's called, or network societies. Depends on the goals here, but some more research. If you visit the networkstate.com or ns.com, this is Balaji's perspective, so it's more on becoming a state-level sovereign to some extent. Now remember, the Vatican is also a state-level sovereign to some extent, so we do have a precedent of organizations that have a seat at the table with governments in certain capacities. Also something to note is that arguably the first network state whether we wanted it to or not, was ISIS that people formed online based on religious ideology, and then assembled in the Middle East, and that was a fairly traumatic experience for everyone. So one of the reasons to engage with network states is so that we facilitate better angels, because if we just go, oh, well, the internet's never going to have this manifestation in the real world, history's already proven us wrong there. There are actual armies that form through the decentralized internet. They then galvanize and then become a central force. So back to legal engineering and this analogy, the car analogy. So yeah, horse and buggy, this is where we are right now with existing law. It's very slow, it's incredibly expensive, it's all done manually. People are using their brains for the most part for the computation that has to be done. And so we're transitioning now over to this stage, this car stage. So something like a Ricardian contract on Hatch protocol, that's something we're innovating on right now. That's kind of like the beginning of a internal combustion engine. There isn't really any cheap products. They're kind of still expensive. So it's Mercedes, but it's not Henry Ford's stage. At the kind of visionary innovator point. It hasn't crossed the chasm yet, essentially what I'm saying, into here. We don't have mechanical operations that have crossed the chasm, but we do have examples of law that is acting in a different modality. Kleros maybe is a great example. That one is a dispute resolution that in traditional legal ethics seems wrong, but realizing that Kleros appeals can happen over 100 times and get all the judges involved in appeals. It's a very different system. And I'm personally guided by Gödel, who every axiomatic system has truths outside of it. That's oversimplification, but that's how I feel with legal ethics as well, especially when we're transitioning to this new period. But something that happens quite a bit, I think, when we're talking about innovation within law and scaring people off, rightfully so, is we jump from the mechanization, mechanical, so from physical kind of animal labor to mechanical labor. We jump from that when we're talking about the transition from this to this, we jump from this to this here, and this is automation, full automation. So like Waymo, and what we've seen actually is there's at least 100 years if cars are looking at the amount of time it took for cars to develop before we get to the point where we can finally automate. So the big difference between mechanization and automation is the attention of the navigator, so us, right? So when we're in full automation with Waymo, we just have to say, I want you to take me to this endpoint. So we're still the navigator, but arguably the meta-navigator. So all we have to say is go here, and then we can focus on our phone or whatever we want to do in the Waymo, and the Waymo will get us there. Whereas in traditional cars, we still have to pay full attention. If we fall asleep, we crash and such. So that's why I think people are right in law when they're concerned that we're saying we're going from traditional law to automated law, because we're basically saying we're going to stop paying attention to what's the legal processes are happening. And of course, a lot of negative things can happen if we're not paying attention. So legal engineering deflates the cost of law. And so our belief is, it's looking at LawTech, that the inflation that's happening, LawTech is in a sense a triage. It has immediate ability to help lawyers be more efficient in traditional ways of doing, so they can catch up to the speed of commerce that's happening in the other industries that they're supporting. And so that'll zero out hopefully the inflation, but legal engineering it's not, so that would be horse and buggy, but horse and buggy with support structures that are more modern. But legal engineering is switching. It's a totally different kind of vehicle. It operates with fundamentally novel processes, at least in large areas of law. And so the hope with it is that, like we found with transportation, legal engineering can not just break even, so not have inflationary costs of law, but actually have costs of law become law being abundant. So we live in a society that law is bountiful. And so one of the reasons it is this area that is right now not so developed out is because it's a lot of legal engineering, if it's not fully inventive legal engineering, it's more like daily bread and butter legal engineering. It oftentimes gets stuck in this place in the Venn diagram that traditionally didn't exist. So this basically this intersection between traditional legal deliverables and general products hardly existed 10, 20 years ago, but now it's becoming more and more common. So why? Because it's something that is living. It's an actual application in some shape or form. So in that way, it's a product, but it's tailor fit. It's bespoke to the actual customer. And so then it's like a deliverable. So traditionally, it was easy to separate lawyers from clients because if it's something that is an app, it's a product type, well, then that's going to be a client. And if it's something that's a deliverable, it's a piece of paper that's printed out, that's an agreement or something like that, it's static, then that's a deliverable. So it was pretty easy to distinguish between the two. So for instance, LawTech that supports a lawyer drafting a contract, well, that's fine because that's a product that's helping lawyers create the contract, and then the deliverable, though, is the lawyer has shared that contract with the client, and then gets the client to sign. But something like HATS protocol, for instance, we don't even need to get into that. Something like, well, basically using AI, so we can then have a document. AI can read that document, understand it, and then turn that document into a living environment. So say the document says, if this condition happens and this change occurs, and say it's stock market shares have a certain change or something like that, well, the AI can go out and be agentic and actually look at that. So the more and more sophisticated we get with technology, the more and more these lines between deliverables and products are blurred. Vibe coding now, more and more lawyers can engage in the legalese of that computers can also engage with. So one of the reasons network states is a good place to work in, or at least prosper, is that it's this middle. It offers a regulatory environment that is okay exploring this middle ground, whereas bar associations don't offer yet a framework that can explore that middle ground, and it's arguable that it should be a legal engineering association, just like how patent agents are governed separate from a traditional lawyer agency, because patent agents have to be good at engineering. Well, very much so, legal engineers also have to be good at engineering. And we do see, similar to patent agents, that some legal engineers won't be lawyers, and because they have to be highly specialized in a certain area of engineering. So one thing I envisioned, like Tornado Cash, the developers there, the assumption was they're not part of the legal community, and they aren't. But if we have an area where people can become professional legal engineers, then they would be more aware of where they can engineer safely within the law. And if they do something that the rest of the legal community disagrees with, the presumption is that it's the legal community as a whole that is in disagreement, not that they're outside of the law, which is what happened to those Tornado developers. So we'll see what time tells. Again, we're just starting out the association, so we're pretty early here. But my argument, at its core, what legal engineering is doing is lawyers are excellent wordsmiths. That's what lawyers do better than other people, and what lawyers are able to, especially in the past, excel compared to the rest of the population is take language and make it as precise as possible. And so there's less confusion and vagueness, so that helps with making sure people don't litigate each other because of misunderstandings. And so it's critical in law to take language and make it as exact as it can be, and that's a lot of the reasons why legalese looks and sounds different than traditional ways of expressing language, because its goal is to be much more kind of pedantic, not to tell a good yarn and to be entertaining. So it's no surprise then that upgrades to language have been done by lawyers who are focusing on even more precision, enough precision that computers that are completely literal, that aren't going to read between the lines, which even the best contract does have that read between the lines. Vagueness is actually a feature at some point. these lawyers that have used their wordsmithing at its most innovative are the people who have come up with critical innovations in language, such as markup language. So markup language is red line drafting, so contract negotiation. Charles Goldfarb saw that. He was working at IBM, but he had a Harvard law degree, and IBM was associated with MIT. So it's the fact that Cambridge, Massachusetts is where the first very clear legal engineering in the 70s came about makes sense, because it was an academic space where there was the highest probability that someone would have a knowledge base in law as well as in computer science. And so he took this legal information technology and then translated it into computer technology. And so he made standard general markup language, again, through how contracts redline markup documents and pass it back and forth between each other. And SGML, then IBM was able to take these thousand pages of documents and grab a particular clause from these thousand pages. So really advanced parsing and query systems at the time. If we think about pinpoint citation, which is still purely a lawyer thing, that's an amazing innovation on being able to, from a computer science perspective, being able to grab. So a lot of it's library sciences, where the early stage legal jurisprudential technologies can be translated into computer science. But anyway, so what came of markup language was Tim Berners-Lee took that and made HTML, and so then we have the internet. So the argument here is similar to how the narrative has been expressed poorly, created concerns, and rightfully so, people hearing the narrative when it's going from traditional law into automation, because, well, you're accelerating, moving everything, speeding it up, and then you're not even paying attention. Well, that's, yeah, one's risk, spidey sense should go off there. Similar to this one, the narrative of natural language and computer language is why I think it's been problematic. So if we had a narrative in the past 30, 40 years where we didn't say natural language and computer language, we instead said language is evolving in its precision, then I believe we wouldn't have this literacy problem where 90-some% of lawyers, I would argue, are illiterate to what is required of modern lawyering literacy, which is the maximum precision possible. And these days, the maximum precision possible is way more than traditional legalese. It includes computer legible legalese. So there, I don't know of any law school that has a literacy program to get people up to date in modern literacy capacities, because that's computer language. It's not human language. But especially with AI coming in and helping people vibe code and such, and be co-pilots and doing traditional coding, that more and more I think is that those sharp separations are becoming muddled, and if-else statements, for loops, those are to me like knowing how to do arithmetic. They're just fundamental to impactful expression in modern society. So obviously we expect lawyers to be math literate. And if we look at languages like Hebrew, math is part of the language. So that's my narrative here. We can have JavaScript be part of the language of English, especially arrays. Like there's Oxford Common disputes that cost millions of dollars. Arrays, fix that. You don't need any computer for that. It's just brackets and commas. It's just a symbolic logic that has been around for over 100 years. Developed initially, by philosophers, but a lot of lawyers are philosophers. There's a reason for that, because philosophers are great at language and lawyers need to be great at language. So I mentioned this a little bit before. This is the history of legal engineering. So we've got smart contracts. That's a big area where legal engineering is. Legal tech startups. Legal engineers tend to be in-house in legal tech startups because the product facing is for traditional legal practice, but legal engineers are often a part of creating those products for traditional legal, and then again it gets back to, well, when do legal engineers need to be their own profession? Is when the products are too bespoke for particular clients. So if the products are generalized, then there's a path to monetization, and legal engineers just make those general products. And then DAOs and other programmable institutions, that's really accelerating legal engineering. And as we said earlier, network states are part of that accelerant that's happening. So to me, the very first legal engineer was Pierre de Fermat, because he was the beginning of calculus. So more Leibniz calculus than Newton's calculus. It's the same ultimate process, derivatives and such. But I say more Leibniz actually than Newton, because what Pierre created was at equality, and equality is saying, well, this isn't exactly equal, it's almost exactly equal. And I believe Pierre took that from de minimis. So when he was a court lawyer, and so at some point it's okay. Well, who cares about the harms? It's $5, and we got to move on to the next case. So let's cut it off. And so as a mathematician, he was more pragmatic than other mathematicians. He wasn't so ideal, and so he went, okay, let's do at equality, and then that led to infinitesimal, which led to limits and all that. So that's why we have derivative calculus, because he was willing to do a bit of a lossy solution. And then that opened up a whole field of math, not so fixated on absolute lossless. And the reason why I'm saying it's engineering is because that math has led to lots and lots of applied uses. But very clearly, Charles Goldfarb, I mentioned him before, he made markup language, and so he's arguably the grandfather of the internet. And then Nick Szabo, he created smart contracts. The way he made it, smart contracts is realizing programming language. It's 3 elements of contracts: consensus ad idem, privity, and consideration. The first two, consensus ad idem, privity, computers actually do that better than humans. The consensus ad idem, the JavaScript ran on my machine, JavaScript ran on your machine, it's going to be running the exact same. So all the machines are reading and interpreting it in the same way. So they have, consensus ad idem means meeting of the minds. So each machine is understanding, interpreting. Humans, that's really tough, because you and I can interpret the same sentence in different ways, and so it takes time to go, okay, well, we've read the sentence, now let's talk a bit, let's paraphrase it, let's see if we actually understand the shared reality. Now, part of the problem with computers is they all interpret the same way, and the cost there is literalism. So they'll interpret things in an absurd modality, not realize that. They won't fill in the gaps and help improve the logic of whoever was writing it verbatim. But as we have more AI, LLMs, then we're going to perhaps, make consensus ad idem on the computer side a little bit fuzzier. But that's why composites of smart contracts and AI, that's ultimately how we're going to be building this stuff out. So the smart contracts have that really rigid range of motion that we know what's going to happen. The AI has the ability to fill in the gaps. And back to the smart contracts. So consensus ad idem, privity. Privity is if my machine SSHs into your machine, so we have pipes, it's all encrypted, there's not a third machine that's going to be involved in that conversation, and then it's also involved in the contractual relationship. So that one's also better than humans. Either way, it's functionally equivalent in the least. But what wasn't there for machines is consideration. So a computer asks another computer to do something, and that other computer will do it. That's it. It won't ask for any funds or anything like that. Well, so by adding consideration, it doesn't really matter for machines. Why would you add consideration? But it turns out because humans ultimately are what are running these machines. So with consideration included, so now your machine, hey, can you do this for me? Fine, I'll do it, but pay me. Well, what that means is who's actually getting paid is the human being who's running that. And so we had an incentive system then to have distributed ledger technology. And that's really opened up possibility space, because with distributed ledger, then we also the server, that intermediary that's necessary on sharing this data, we can then have competition. So we can have a kind of laissez-faire environment, where if you look at Web 2, because there isn't any incentive to hold the databases, groups like Facebook, they have all of our data, but they have a monopoly on the server. So by paying people who are holding the database through gas fees and other consideration methods, that's what smart contracts have upgraded just traditional programming for, then that's enough for the database managers, and we don't need the server to be the monetization, or it doesn't need to have a monopoly to monetize, so we have competition like OpenSea, and there's like 40 or 50 or so competitors for it, because with RPC rather than REST calls, you just choose a different RPC if you don't like that provider. So arguably already just 2 legal engineers, yes, inventors, early stage legal engineers creating new paradigms. But nevertheless, they've created over 20 trillion in wealth, arguably, because without them we would not have the internet and we would not have Ethereum. So what we're doing, this is our perspective at Ixion. So this isn't necessarily how other people are going to define legal engineering. Again, it's early stage. We just have LISA, the Legal Engineering Standard Association. We're planning out with consensus in other groups. But our belief is at the core of it is recognizing that law, scientific law, and legal law are both called law because they're both law. And so scientific law focuses on prediction accuracy, and legal law focuses on human relationships. And then we're engineers because we're applying that. So we're synthesizing these two ways of developing law, and we're doing so in an applied modality. So that often means that we have to deconstruct, but then reconstruct a law. So the examples of Charles Goldfarb and Nick Szabo, that's what I was doing there. I was looking at Szabo going, okay, well, let's deconstruct contracts, and then we've sort of got three elements, and that's law school, and that's what the practice of jurisprudence arguably is, deconstructing. But then, so we can take those insights from jurisprudence and then reconstruct within concepts like smart contracts. And then, so already we've created a lot of utility out of that, over 20 trillion in value, I'm arguing. So, again, this is Ixion's values, early stage. We'll see where the overall industry goes. But our hope is that legal law is much more regulated by empirical facts than superstitious norms. If you've ever been to court, there's lots of superstitious norms, like wearing a wig and having lots and lots of respect for the judge, regardless of the outcomes. And so we apply more and more empirical requirements in the practice of law, like other professions require, especially this being a profession that impacts people's lives so much. So a core way we believe to do this is to separate between a posteriori and a priori. So in a posteriori, it's basically that's when we're in the empirical process. We're guessing what the law is going to do, but we don't really know what it's going to do. And then once we develop enough certainty, which business loves certainty, and not just certainty, but the outcomes we want as well, then we can take that a posteriori and then move that into a priori, actual laws. So in Prospera with polycentric regulation, this is very doable because when it's in a posteriori mode, so it's a new area, like for instance, AI regulation, AI ethics regulation, we believe that the tortfeasor test is the way to go. So we get AI to show that it will comply with tort and also is even motivated by tort, could potentially help tort evolve. And so the Blade Runner is not a Turing test Blade Runner, it's an insurance provider that's doing a tortfeasor test. And so, but that's our hypothesis. So right now that's in the a posteriori stage. If it turns out after many years of experimentation that does provide the certainty we want, so a taxi driver that's an AI agent isn't running people over, and if it does the proper payouts, it's total accident, a direct tort modality, but also indirect tort, then that's great. And then so this little experiment, sandbox experiment, that with the tortfeasor test gives manufacturers not strict liability, they get us to safe harbor. We can then move that into more crystallized law. So say, for instance, it proves out in Prospera, so that means then we codify it, say, within the US. And then, so the US Fed decides we're gonna take on tortfeasor test rather than bespoke. Or, a combination. There's some bespoke AI regulation, but tortfeasor test ends up being take up a good chunk of the solution there. So the core KPI for us, though, is more legal relationships between people. So if we see in society that there are far more companies out there, far more trusts, and those are actually run appropriately. People nowadays with LegalZoom can create companies, but they don't actually run them appropriately. So well-managed dynamics. And so there's not really a scenario where people think they're going to do a venture together and then, well, the legal costs too much, so we're not going to do the venture anymore because it's the cost of a hamburger, to do what used to cost thousands of dollars. Then that's the key. That's the KPI that we think we're winning then. So we want more law, more legal abundance, and we believe the way to do that is to go from this predominantly muscular, so there's only so much bandwidth lawyers can do, and that's why if you got to pay a lawyer more if they're already bandwidth out. So, and then the people that don't have any lawyers who can do it, that don't have the attention for it, those great projects just don't get done. Moving from that to mechanical, so we can more and more address needs by not having lawyers do all this labor and exhaust their brains and they have to take a break. All that's outsourced to the machines, but lawyers are still very attentive. And then eventually we go to automation, where lawyers don't even have to be part of the cycle. So, yeah, getting back to this. So this is the images we have. So this is where we're thinking what law is. It's under the hood. It's the engine, the legal processes and such. And then what that means in practice, it's more like a CPU. That's under the hood. That's where the mechanical processes are being done for mental labor. It's this, but it's very similar to muscular labor. Same thing. So Lex is there. And then just looking at the time difference between when the Model T Ford was out. So the first time we crossed the chasm for mechanized transport to Waymo, which now we're still early yet on full automation. It was over 100 years. And also the jobs have changed. So it's not like people have lost jobs. So mechanics didn't exist around 100 years ago. Now there's 800,000 mechanics in the US. But stable hands, those have virtually vanished. Importantly, for lawyers that really like being in their social status, equestrians still have lots of prestige. So the activity, maybe a daily bread and butter lawyer would be considered a stable hand now, and then in the future they'll be considered a mechanic. So the activities are a bit different. Arguably, mechanics have a better life than stable hands. We'll see how things go. It's an analogy. One of the core reason automation takes so long is because there's the whole milieu of it's not just the vehicle becoming faster. It's also, well, the vehicle's faster now a dirt road, if you go 100 kilometers an hour, that's not going to work. So we have to figure out cement, and then we also have to figure out freeways, and then we have concepts like you can't go slower than 30 kilometers an hour. Well, in this circumstance, you can't go as fast as 30 kilometers an hour. So there's this whole environment where existing transportation, right? Say we're in this era right now. There will be a whole future environment where we're at right now can't even engage with it. So if you put a horse and buggy on a freeway, police are going to pull you over and because you're just not at the hyperspeed. So again, looking at something like Claros, the speed of business is so fast in global commerce right now, that's what it's trying to address. So it's realizing that dispute resolution processes that are too slow, those have time is money, so those have such a high cost that the dispute resolution process is causing too much tort for whatever tort was initially the reason that people went into the dispute in the first place. And so it just doesn't work. So that's what Claro says, well, let's just readdress it. Let's have a highway system where you can't even stop. You go fast. And so that's then when we're looking at it, we go, oh, well, ethics actually doesn't make it. We start to realize we have to have different ethical paradigms because the milieu has to be just a very different kind of milieu than the existing milieu. When we add a lot of speed to the environment, there's actually a state change that happens overall. And so Claros might not be the right answer, but definitely we should expect some what would be considered radical in this environment solutions, because we really are now in this environment over here. Something I recently experienced was bringing supplies into Zuitzerland. The custom agents held up the supplies a few days. We're here not very many days, so the projects we plan to do, the supplies didn't get there in time, and so that is actually an incredibly expensive tariff. I would much prefer to have spent $50 on a tariff to get that stuff here immediately rather than the time is money cost. So realizing that time and speed interact very intimately with money and cost efficiency is pretty helpful, especially in the modern environment of who has tariffs and who doesn't have tariffs. It turns out to be hidden tariffs through temporality. So yeah, long story short, focus on legal tech hacks right now, but in the future, legal and engineering hacks are going to be more and more common. Stanford, they've got a really great, their Codex team. Every month, I think, or maybe every week, people are doing LawTech, give presentations here and there. So I suggest signing up to that to get a good understanding of new products like Spellbook and these other legal tech products. And then, yeah, keep your eye on legal engineering in the future. Again, oftentimes in-house legal tech does require at least 1 or 2 legal engineers there. And then another suggestion is to go to lisa.law and sign up for our newsletter. And again, it's early stage, but we're doing it with Consensus and some other top-level Web3 legal engineers. And the impetus there is, network states, that these enterprise organizations like Consensus, at least the enterprise venture studios, have now network state departments, and those departments know how important legal engineering is to fulfill the vision of network states. So with that, that's my presentation. Thank you all for coming, and I don't have time. I don't know if I went over time, but happy to stay for questions. Yeah. Sure. And let me hand you this so you get on record.
Pardon?
Oh, just so we can record.
Oh, okay. So I wanted to ask, does this mean that there's also a threat to maybe legal jobs?
Yeah, so that's why I got here.
Also, I'm likening your legal engineering to something that happened back home. So there was protests that were going on back in Nairobi, where the government wanted to pass a bill, and not many people actually understood the bill itself. So now tech bros at home decided to create multiple versions of the bill in comparison to what our constitution actually says and how many rules the new bill is breaking. Yeah, so the people who were actually undertaking this weren't actually lawyers. They were more of techies than lawyers. Now, eventually, they were able to also interpret the bill into multiple local dialects, Luya, Luo, things like that. So more people were able to understand what was actually going on. Now, back to the legal engineering. Is it possible then, if you're moving like this, eventually everyone can just become their own lawyer?
So I am critical of where the legal profession is right now. But if we look at societies, historically, they don't have lawyers. They create legal relationships between each other. And then there's a certain class of people that is very good at language and reading and that. It's kind of nerdy. And then they become the lawyer class. And especially, I know more about the English courts, how those developed. But the first judges were roaming judges, and they would have a hood in their behind them, and people would tip them. So this was a lot of incentives for the legal community to be as greased the gears of social relationships that was naturally, organically, grassroots built out in community. And nowadays, arguably, lawyers play a role of being the sawdust of the gears, if I'm being the most critical, and slowing everyone down and saying, hey, I'm the policeman here, you can't do this, you can't do that other thing. But again, the underlying aspects of law is people who specialize in the relationships between parties that naturally form and really should be facilitators of helping that be more harmonious. So one of the things I've noticed in Web3, because people are so fed up with lawyers in Web3, because a lot of lawyers in Web3 have been taking money when they lion share money and not providing actual value, oftentimes actually being the police and then, hey, pay me, I'm going to stop you from doing what you want and you got to pay me a lot. They're really traumatized by lawyers, and their assumption is lawyers are something to avoid at all costs, and so then they are basically being their own lawyers. So they're doing the exact roles that a lawyer is doing. They're reinventing the wheel, but why? Because they're trying to stay away from this group that they consider now more of a cartel than a economic value add. When I started out before law school, I did this apprenticeship with a CEO who he made this apprenticeship because he had so many lawyers he hired that killed deals. He was doing M&A in the music industry that killed deals, that he wanted to teach us before we went into law school what the business professional actually wanted from lawyers. And so, yeah, I was his shadow for a whole year before I went into law school, and that is one of the reasons I've gone down this path, especially, yeah, watching how we did those M&A deals. We bought the MGM catalog from EMI, and so much of that should have been mechanized. That we were looking at spreadsheets and A-Bing them with our eyeballs rather than running machines on that. So it was very clear that at that time, and that was a long time ago, that there were just very simple efficiencies that should have been included in the legal information supply chain. And because I was doing that apprenticeship as a way to hopefully rejuvenate the law. So then again, well, lots of lawyers are great at, well, the lawyers that are great at M&A closing deals, those are worth more than their weight in gold. And those people tend to be actually very, very successful because they're so rare. And definitely in the music industry, the ones that close those deals have really fun lives. But lots of lawyers get focused on, well, here's what the law is, and you better not do this, that, and another thing. Not how do we get you to the success you want. So it's definitely very teachable that we can rejuvenate the legal community. And that was also my point before about how people there are certain engineers that are developing that end up engineering in finance and other areas that are just pretty much law, that we can then facilitate them through legal engineering. And patent agents is an example of where we have, to some extent, already facilitated them into then having a deeper understanding of law and to be better at, harmonizing with the wider legal environment. But the example you gave, I'm thinking about how there's so much legal complexity. Like, for instance, the MGM catalog we bought, that was Tom and Jerry, just decades and decades of a huge catalog. No one person can absorb and understand all the legal relationships in there, but LLMs can. So arguably, really soon, lawyers will be, arguably negligent if they're not using AI to map out all the extant legal relationships. Yes, there wasn't the capacity to do that in the past. Now there is, and so that to me is what your example is. That there wasn't the mechanical capacity that's actually there. The lawyers weren't employing that, and there's an argument, especially because the population is behaving the way they have been in that the lawyers are being negligent, not being so cutting edge, and providing that clarity that now is possible. In the past, that wasn't. And so that then gets to my point: is I much rather get the legal community to go, oh, well, this is a language issue. We're great linguists. We'll just take this on, and we'll just be illiterate here. So no worries. We are the brightest and the most capable. So we just need to pay attention, and then we can solve this. So yeah, that's part of this argument, is bringing people that are building up basically their own lawyer class from scratch, because for whatever reason they're alienated from lawyers, or lawyers just aren't able to understand the literacy environment that they're operating in. Bring them into the fold, and then also then have lawyers who are already in the fold to then rejuvenate. And so we can meet in the middle and have this whole new paradigm of hopefully legal abundance. So I hope that answered your question to some extent. But yeah, that's why I'm saying here is we're not going to have no more lawyers. The lawyers might switch, more mechanics than stable hands. And then there will be certain lawyers, especially ones that work in policy, that interact in, it's a people business. A lot of lawyering is people business. They'll stay just as prestigious as they always have been. That's not going to change whatsoever. And hopefully what I see with blockchain is the more and more the blockchain carves out areas that used to take a lot of energy building trust relationships on, because now it's just trustless. We can just assume that all that is fine. We still are constantly focused on building out trust. We just have more bandwidth in the areas that are the stickiest to build trust. So hopefully we are in a more trusting environment as we offload as much as we reasonably can, not more so, but just as much as reasonably can to machines. And then, so it's still a human enterprise at the end of it. Humans are at the center, in my belief, and lawyers can just more focus on those dynamics, and that's what lawyers are excellent on. Gandhi was a lawyer. I mean, some of the most impressive human acts of kindness have come from the legal community. Other questions? No, okay.
I can just comment on that, maybe, as a lawyer.
Yeah, yes.
No, I definitely agree. There's a lot of law firms out there. They don't really. I mean, I see it as a. I mean, I come from business, originally from banking. Most of the time I was like an in-house legal counsel, and it's a very different role than being like an external lawyer working in a law firm, right? So you have a total different mindset because you have to work with your team as an in-house legal counsel. So you basically have to facilitate business, right? That's your role and your goal as well. Whereas if you're like an external like lawyer or law firm, that's not your goal necessarily, right? So you have a different incentive there. You just want to like have as many billable hours as possible. And this is something, unfortunately, that I see in Web3 as well. Like in Switzerland, we have like big law firms offering services to the Web3 community, but sometimes I just feel they just want to make as much money as possible, to be honest. I mean, yeah. And that's why I also left a bigger law firm, because I was like, okay, we actually have to serve the community. That's our role as lawyers. We have to facilitate business. We have to like stretch the regulations so that startups, they can offer their like whatever, like token or project, they can roll out their project. So this is something, that's at least how I see my role. I mean, I have a team, we're a law firm, but we're slightly different than traditional law firms, because we just have like, we just see our role from a different angle, or we just feel like we're facilitators and we're not showing what they cannot do, because usually lawyers just say, okay, these are the don'ts, but not necessarily the do's, right? So, and what we try to do is really just to show like, okay, how can you do it? How can you structure your project so that it's actually, from a legal perspective, it's actually possible, so, yeah.
Thanks. And yeah, in-house, you're working with other skill sets, so it's not such the lawyer bubble. It's, I have to be friends with the CFO and other life experiences. And then boutique firms, in my experience, especially with the music industry, those tend to be more likely to have that more alignment. And then some departments that act like boutiques, and Big Law, I've also found, have been really, have been able to realize it's about the client's success. And at least in enterprise, oftentimes that is a really great flywheel for lawyers, and they will make more because that client then gets bigger deals, all that kind of good stuff. You had another question?
I was actually just asking for the slides.
Oh, yes. Okay. Yeah, happy to share the slides. All right. Well, thanks everyone for attending. Really appreciate it.